So good evening. I am Ed Potosnik. I'm Executive Director here at New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. I want to thank folks for joining us. We are going to get started on time. So, if you have anyone that you know is going to be joining us and they miss any of these slides, they'll have a chance to review them a little bit later. Let's see here. We're ready to go. So I'm Ed Potosnik. I'm Executive Director of New Jersey League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. And the fund is a nonpartisan tax-deductible nonprofit that protects our natural resources. We raise awareness of environmental issues and work with the environmental community writ large. We want to thank everyone for coming out today and joining us to talk about regional stormwater management. For those of you who may have to jump off early, or for anyone else that may want to reference what we're talking about tonight at a later point, this webinar is going to be posted on our flooddefensenj.org website. And today we're going to have an exciting conversation about the importance of regional stormwater management in Jersey. But first, we're going to provide a brief overview of stormwater issues currently facing the Garden State, and then follow it up with a discussion of what regional stormwater management and collaboration looks like, and what it could mean for New Jersey communities. And then we'll conclude with a question and answer period and some information about how you can get involved if you're interested in helping New Jersey communities to look at these issues more closely. Before we go any further, I want to introduce our speakers. First, we'll be joined by Adrienne Vicari, who's a professional engineer and a financial services practice leader for the Herbert, Rowland, Gubric Incorporated. She has 15 years of experience in a broad range of financial project management and engineering design services for municipal wastewater and stormwater clients. She's also a member of the Society of Women Environmental Professionals and the Pennsylvania Water Environment Association, and was named to the top 40 under 40 in central Pennsylvania. Herbert, Rowland and Gubric Incorporated, otherwise known as HRG, is an employee-owned, nationally ranked design firm that provides civil engineering, surveying, and environmental services. It was founded in Harrisburg in 1962 and has offices in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. We're really grateful that Adrienne could join us today. And then to my left, probably your right, we have Jim Cosgrove, who is Vice President and Principal of Kleinfelder Incorporated. With over 30 years of experience, Jim has been leading in the field of watershed and wastewater management planning, stormwater management, environmental impact assessments, amongst many other responsibilities. Jim is a member of the Water Environment Federation, the American Society of Civil Engineers, American Water Resources Association, and the New Jersey Clean Water Council. Based in San Diego, Kleinfelder is an engineering, construction management, design, and environmental professional services firm. It operates 60 locations in the United States, Canada, and Australia. And I want to thank Jim for joining us here tonight as well. As many may have been noticing, November of 2018 was a really big month. The National Climate Assessment was released with a number of significant findings that threaten the livelihoods, economy, and welfare of New Jerseyans. Now we see on average, homeowners could expect to endure a severe 100-year storm during a period of their 30-year mortgage. Intense heavy rain events on average are happening roughly 4% more since 1901 in the United States. While the Northeast has observed 27% increase in the 5-year maximum daily precipitation within that same time period. And it may not be a coincidence that 2018 was the wettest year on record in New Jersey. The impacts of climate change are happening in New Jersey. We're seeing it. Our businesses and our families, they see the impacts firsthand, whether it's intensified by more frequent rainfalls or high storm surges from storms like Hurricane Sandy or Lee or Irene or nor'easters. This can directly lead to more flooding, and that's what we're seeing. So there was a recent survey of more than 350 communities in the 48 states released in November. Researchers from the University of Maryland and Texas A&M found that 83% of communities experience local inland flooding. Furthermore, 85% of communities experience flooding outside of the designated flood hazard areas. The report also highlights a major equity issue, that the social costs of these urban flooding events are disproportionately hurting lower income communities that have the least resources. These communities are likely to live in high-risk flood zones, but also less likely to have flood insurance. And the secondary effects of these effects include all kinds of traffic problems, which we hate, and it lowers our productivity, and we incur a loss of hourly wages, And then in addition, 70% of the respondents believe that there was a lack of sufficient infrastructure improvements that was the main contributor to urban flooding. And more than half of those respondents believe their communities failed to make proper infrastructure improvements to withstand increasing levels of rainfall. In its conclusion, the report found some sobering facts. The federal government's not helping us, so it's up to state and local governments to address this problem. So here in New Jersey, we know one thing for sure. Flooding is largely a result of human-built environment. New Jersey is the most densely populated state in America. In October of 2018, according to Popular Science, the most important science policy in New Jersey is getting a grip on stormwater. As the nation's densest state, with the most impervious coverage of any other state, over 12% of our lands are covered with concrete or pavement or something else that doesn't allow the water to absorb. We're also seeing these anticipated climate change impacts and increased frequency and overall volume of heavy rain and flash flooding events. This dispels the foundation for a major public policy, our infrastructure and environmental crisis. Nearly 95% of New Jersey waters don't meet our federal water quality standards. That's an ecological integrity measurement of the most of our major water bodies in the state, and they're declining. And we saw just this past summer, Lake Hopatcong, Greenwood Lake, the Barnegat Bay, they were hit and closed, many of them, for some period of time due to harmful algae blooms. And they're largely spurred by polluted stormwater runoff, polluting nutrients and sediments into the lakes. This provides an abundance of phosphorus that leads to hazardous and potentially blue-green algae to grow out of control. And to know a big part of this is to sort of understand this one little factoid, that 1 pound of phosphorus can lead to as many as 1,100 pounds of blue-green algal scum. And that's what's been sort of devastating the recreation and usage of our lakes. Lake Hopatcong was smothered in it, effectively closing the entire regional economy in the midst. Although it was open to boating, it was not open to anything that where you would have contact with the waterway, with the lake itself. With all these influences putting stress on our stormwater management infrastructure, it's compounded by the fact that New Jersey has not maintained, upgraded, replaced old, antiquated, and in some cases failing stormwater management systems. For all of New Jersey's water infrastructure, there exists roughly $40 billion in investments needed over the next 20 years. This stormwater infrastructure requires the largest share with $16 billion. That's the price tag. So the federal government, we're lacking funding. It's not happening at the federal level. The onus really becomes back onto our states and our local governments to raise revenue to improve these systems. And right now, there's currently no dedicated funding source to address the massive need. And so we want to understand a little better how the state can address these problems. And one of the ways that we can do it, and I think the reason a lot of you were able to join us today, is to learn a little bit more about stormwater utilities. And with that, I'm just going to take a quick pause and just ask you if you have questions during the presentation to take a moment and send them our way. There's a chat button at the bottom of your screen. It's like a little bubble. And if you don't see that, it looks like a cartoon, someone making a comment as they're sort of walking. You might mouse your mouse over, and there's 3 dots that say more. And in that, then you can see chat. And then you send a message that everyone can see with your question. And we're going to be going at the end of the presentations to that area to take your questions. So at any time, if you have any questions, feel free to ask those. So stormwater utilities. There are options that are really available for municipalities, counties, and regional bodies to address the widespread issues like stormwater management in New Jersey. And before new law was signed into effect, we had no options in New Jersey. However, this year, Governor Murphy signed the Clean Stormwater and Flood Reduction Act. It's a permissive bill that simply allows local and regional authorities to establish stormwater utilities to oversee, build, and manage stormwater infrastructure. Similar to your water or sewer utility, a stormwater utility is located in your local community, and they assess dedicated funding to address stormwater management, and that's dedicated solely to the purpose of addressing the issues that we outlined a little bit earlier. Localities can decide whether to create a stormwater utility. They can use a currently existing utility, like a water utility, or also a sewage authority. And really, they're in the best place to be able to make these decisions and put in place the best management practices that are really helping in 41 other states in the country. Across the United States, 1,800 communities have stormwater utilities, and they're widely considered to be the most effective and equitable method to fund stormwater management infrastructure, because it follows what we like to say in New Jersey as the polluters pay principle. If you pollute, you pay. In New Jersey, the revenue raised from stormwater utilities would be dedicated to stormwater management projects and shared services. Nationally, the average fee, just so we can get the money part over with, is just over $4 a month for homeowners. And the larger the region the utility covers, generally the lower the fee is, because there's a sense of market scale, sort of scales of economy. And typical projects. So as I mentioned, revenue raised must go to stormwater management projects. That's including a huge priority on green infrastructure. So many of you know what green infrastructure is, but for those of us who aren't maybe following it as closely, green infrastructure is important because it doesn't use these big pipes or facilities. Rather, it mimics nature and the natural flow and hydrology of the land to stop and control water on site and let it percolate into the soil. And there's a whole bunch of ancillary benefits as well. Every dollar invested in green infrastructure can save $7 to $27 in the future. It's been associated with better health outcomes, reductions in crime, improved property values as well, because they're beautiful to look at and to enjoy. So with that, that's our introduction. I'm going to hand it over to Adrian Vicari to talk about how regions can collaborate on stormwater management issues and what that looks like and some of the best practices across the United States. So hopefully we can hear her. And again, if you have a question, just click in the chat box and type it away, and we'll get to your questions. We have two more short presentations, and we'll take it from there. So Adrienne.
Great, thanks, Ed. You can go to the next slide. So the new stormwater legislation passed in New Jersey this spring really provides a platform for municipalities, counties, and authorities to collaborate for more cost-effective stormwater management. So I'm going to spend a few minutes explaining what collaboration could look like and then how it's being implemented in surrounding states. Next slide, please. So the first type of collaboration I wanted to touch upon is collaboration amongst municipalities at a regional or county level. And one of the benefits of a regional solution is that it supports watershed-based planning and management. We find that political boundaries and watershed boundaries, they seldom coincide. And when we can move outside of political boundaries and solve stormwater problems on a watershed basis, then we can start to address the problem and the source of the problem together. So for instance, we can start addressing some of the downstream flooding impacts and problems along with the upstream source of the flooding. So it allows for much more effective stormwater solutions to be implemented because we're no longer dealing with a fragmented approach. We've also seen in surrounding states, such as Pennsylvania, that the Department of Environmental Protection is willing to streamline regulatory requirements when municipalities collaborate on regional solutions to meet their MS4 permit requirements. Economies of scale, that's another benefit. There's a lot of fixed costs associated with stormwater management, and when we can divide those fixed costs over multiple users, then economies of scale are realized and the cost per municipality comes down. Along those same lines is increased purchasing power for equipment and supplies and enhanced opportunities for government grants and loans. Subsidized funding, it's getting harder and harder to come by, and we're seeing that funding agencies are giving a higher priority to entities that have sustainable stormwater programs, those that are implementing approaches and doing what they can to streamline costs and have developed a long-term funding mechanism such as a stormwater fee that can sustain the infrastructure that grant funding is going to implement. You can go on to the next slide. Stormwater utilities are an effective platform for collaboration amongst municipalities, either at a regional stormwater utility level or a countywide utility level. And besides providing a mechanism for municipalities to partner together, we've also seen that it helps to incentivize property owners to get more involved in managing the rate of stormwater leaving their property, the volume of stormwater, or improving the quality of water leaving their property. And we find that property owners are more likely to make the effort to partner with their community if they're rewarded. Well, a stormwater fee with a credit program is a great way to incentivize property owners to get involved. And implementing a stormwater fee can also be a great chance to educate the community on the true cost of stormwater management and help them realize that they can help mitigate the community's costs by making improvements on their property. And then that cost savings comes back to them through a credit that reduces their fee. We've seen that municipalities realize a whole host of financial and administrative benefits to their stormwater programs once they start getting property owners involved. Again, funding agencies are more likely to fund sustainable stormwater programs, and stormwater utilities typically have that dedicated revenue source from the fee that's not robbed for other community needs. Enhanced stormwater programs, they also provide a backbone for state agencies like NJDOT to partner. State agencies are also struggling with the cost of stormwater management, and we've been able to see some great partnerships that develop between state and stormwater utilities that can bring a myriad of cost savings to both entities. You can go on to the next slide. So this chart provides examples of entities that a stormwater utility led by a municipality or an authority could consider collaborating with on stormwater management. I've already touched upon collaboration amongst county and local agencies, as well as property owners. Well, utilities also provide the backbone for collaboration with watershed or other types of environmental groups, and also with state and federal agencies. These types of collaborations, they generally provide cost savings that can be shared amongst all properties, then to arrive at more cost-effective and sustainable stormwater solutions for communities. You can go ahead to the next slide. So in thinking through the benefits of collaboration, we wanted to share with you the story of a pioneer in regional stormwater management in neighboring Pennsylvania. And that pioneer is Wyoming Valley Sanitary Authority that's located in Luzerne County in the Wilkes-Barre and Scranton area of the state. 2 years ago, they formed the first regional stormwater authority in Pennsylvania, and now we're seeing them as a role model with a number of other counties and other regional authorities following suit now in Pennsylvania. So historically, the role of WVSA was as a wastewater authority. They served 36 municipalities in Luzerne County, providing them wastewater service. And of those 36 municipalities, 32 entered into intergovernmental agreements with WVSA for stormwater service. You can go on to the next slide. So how is WVSA partnered and what is their role? So they're currently in phase 1 of implementation, where they're serving as the MS4 permit administrator. So as part of that, they're completing the new permit requirements. That includes, in Pennsylvania, preparation of a pollutant reduction plan, where they're required to implement best management practices that are designed to reduce sediment pollution getting into waterways by 10% over the next 5 years. They're implementing all of those green infrastructure requirements. They're mapping stormwater infrastructure in the municipalities, and they're completing some of the minimum control measures that are required as part of their MS4 permits. These are items that most of the municipalities wanted to tackle regionally. Then phase 2 is something that they're looking to get involved with commencing in 2023, which would be the next permit cycle. And in order to reduce the overall stormwater program cost for municipalities, WVSA was looking to become a co-permittee and through lease agreements begin operating, maintaining, and improving the existing stormwater infrastructure. And then phase 3 is an enhanced form of phase 2, where WVSA is going to consider actually owning and operating the separate stormwater systems in each of the municipalities. You can go on to the next slide. As part of WVSA's program, the municipalities are maintaining ownership of the MS4 permits for the time being, and they're maintaining ownership and control of existing stormwater infrastructure, so the existing inlets, pipes, outfalls in each of those municipalities. WVSA is taking a portion of the fee revenue that's coming in from the stormwater fee, and they're funding savings accounts for the municipalities to use to improve their stormwater assets. Property owners, again, then they're partnering with WVSA and their municipality to implement best management practices, green infrastructure approaches to control stormwater runoff, and they're engaging in public events promoting water quality. In each of the 32 municipalities that are served by WVSA, we've been able to demonstrate that those municipalities are saving between 50 and 70% in capital improvement costs over the next 5 years by coming together in this regional solution. Go on to the next slide. And in fact, you can see through the first bullet point that partnering amongst the municipalities is projected to save $47 million over the next 5 years and $264 million over the next 20. In addition, WVSA is expanding in other strategic partnerships for additional cost savings. They plan to partner with a county flood protection authority on green infrastructure projects. And this is allowing WVSA to implement large regional scale BMPs and flood control devices that are owned by the Flood Protection Authority. And that's reducing the cost of regulatory compliance by over $9 million. Through a partnership with the United States Geological Survey, USGS, the federal government bought from WVSA all of the aerial imagery and the LiDAR data that they developed to derive impervious area coverage per property. They also formed a strategic partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers that's going to help them complete GIS mapping of all of the stormwater infrastructure in the 32 municipalities. The partnership with the Corps is a 50-50 cost share program, so WVSA is cutting their cost in half through that partnership. The way in which the impervious area was developed and their federal partnerships are saving them over $10 million over the next 5 years. And WVSA is also looking to form partnerships with local universities, schools, organizations who will come alongside them to assist with some of the minimum control measures, which include public education and public involvement. All of the new stormwater requirement cost, it costs a lot of money. There's not a lot of grant dollars available. So the more partnerships that WVSA forms, the lower their user fee is kept. So partnerships that can be used to meet a lot of these growing costs of stormwater management is really what they've focused on for their community. And we found that regional entities, they're able to much more effectively partner with agencies and to work on sustaining those partnerships in order to see cost savings that can be spread throughout the community. Go on to the next slide. So as we start thinking about regional collaboration and how to get started, some of the tips that we've seen in Pennsylvania and in neighboring states is that a regional leader is needed, and that can be a regional stormwater authority, it could be a county. There's a lot of different ways we've seen collaboration work. We've seen communities come together in consortiums, we've seen COGs form to manage stormwater, but the ones that really do the most and are able to take implementation the farthest, that's when you have a single regional leader that is able to continue to steer the ship and keep it moving forward. Oftentimes, there's also needs to be the willingness of a leader to expend some of the funds up front for stormwater until stormwater fees can be put in place and the leader can be repaid. So a lot of times these entities are stepping forward, they're borrowing money, or they're getting grant funding in place to help fund the initial implementation costs. They're keeping track of what other costs they incur, and they're building that into the stormwater fees for repayment in the first few years. Open collaboration is really key between all of the partners, both the leader, whether that's the county or authority and municipalities, and using a business plan to demonstrate the cost savings to municipalities and property owners can be key. Coming together, everyone's going to give up a little bit of control over the way they're managing stormwater, but being able to demonstrate the benefits and the cost savings that come alongside that is really important. Developing a future vision and defining the benefits, things that people can get behind, and education and communication along the way are really key. So with that, I'll turn the presentation back over to you, Ed.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Again, those of you who have questions, some folks have found their way to the chat box. We have a couple questions in there, which we'll get to in just a short order. But to find the chat box, you look at the bottom of the screen and there's a little bubble, looks sort of like a cartoon bubble, and it says chat. It has 3 dots in it. If you can't see it, it might be because your window is too small, and you might have to click the 3 dots that say more, and then in that menu, you can see the chat box. And we'll be going to those questions in just a minute. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Jim Cosgrove, who's going to talk about what this really means to us and our public health and improving water quality in New Jersey.
Sure. Thanks, Ed. So Adrienne just gave a great example of how a collaboration via a stormwater utility has worked so well in Pennsylvania. there's an issue in New Jersey that I wanted to talk about, and that is TMDLs, total maximum daily loads. Some of you may be familiar that a bunch of TMDLs were completed by the New Jersey DEP over the last decade or so. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how collaboration could be used to solve some of the TMDL issues that we have. So first, let me start with what is a TMDL. As I mentioned, the acronym stands for Total Maximum Daily Load, and it's the load that's needed to achieve water quality standards. I think the easiest way to think about it is it's a pollution diet. So instead of us trying to figure out how many calories we can consume so that we lose weight or gain weight or do whatever we want in terms of weight, here we're looking at how much load must be reduced to achieve a water quality standard. And TMDLs are an artifact of the Clean Water Act. In New Jersey, we first completed monitoring. We assessed all the streams. We determined which of those streams were impaired. And then once we had a list of the impaired waters, DEP is required to complete TMDLs to develop or to determine how to get the streams that are impaired today from being impaired. And then they need to implement the TMDL. And the implementation of the TMDL is really where collaboration can pay off. So the large-scale TMDLs that were completed in New Jersey over the last decade and a half were mostly nutrient TMDL projects. And on the right side of the slide, you'll see a map of New Jersey. The red highlighted area is the Passaic River Basin. The blue area is the Raritan River Basin. And the green area is the Rancocas River Basin. My firm completed nutrient TMDLs in each of those three watersheds for the New Jersey DEP. That ended up being about a quarter of the land area in New Jersey. And all three of those TMDLs resulted in a large pollutant reduction requirement. There are multiple point source discharges. These are typically municipal wastewater treatment plant discharges. There are very significant non-point sources and significant natural sources. Where are we with those TMDLs today? Well, we've made a lot of progress on the point source reductions that were required by those TMDLs. So wastewater treatment plants are now upgrading their facilities, which is resulting in a great reduction of phosphorus load. Phosphorus was a key nutrient in these studies. But in some places, the point source reduction alone will result in a great environmental improvement. The kind of environmental improvement I'm talking about would be reduced algae in the streams, reduced plant growth, and improved dissolved oxygen. But the non-point source improvements that are required by the TMDLs, we really haven't seen much action on yet. There's really no regulatory hook right now to address the non-point sources. And this is sort of a pet peeve of mine, because what I'm concerned about is if we don't find the stormwater improvements, the non-point source improvements, if we don't achieve those, there are many places that will spend millions of dollars on user fees on the wastewater treatment plant side, but we won't get a commensurate improvement to the environment as a result of that. So we need to find a way to achieve the non-point source or the stormwater improvements. Well, as Adrienne mentioned, water doesn't follow municipal boundaries, and collaboration is a way we can provide a regional solution to achieve some of those non-point source stormwater improvements that we need to meet. So you already got some great advantages of the regional approach. Certainly it provides a more cost-effective way of doing this. Think about what would happen if each municipality is asked to achieve the TMDL it's just going to be a hodgepodge of solutions, and municipalities are going to have to research things on their own and try to figure this out and hire consultants to solve the problem. This really eliminates duplication of efforts. Also, it maximizes opportunities for grants and loans. If everybody goes about this on their own, it makes it more difficult to even identify available grants and loans, no less actually receive them. Streamlines the regulatory requirements, makes it much easier to get the permits that might be necessary to do this. And in the end, it'll result in much larger improvements by doing it on a watershed or regional basis. Well, I guess the bottom line here is that if we don't find a way to get collaboration moving in New Jersey, I don't believe we're going to complete our TMDLs. The funding we have is not going to be sufficient to allow everybody to do this on a piecemeal basis. Also, collaboration gets the stakeholders united towards a common goal. It's very difficult to do that if you have every municipality, for example, trying to do this. Since water doesn't follow municipal boundaries, it's going to be very difficult doing this on an individual municipal basis. And then my biggest concern is if we don't achieve the necessary stormwater reductions, we won't achieve the necessary load reductions from the TMDL. And if we don't achieve the necessary total load reductions, we risk wasting money on the point source upgrades and then not get it on the stormwater side and not get a commensurate environmental improvement. I will stop there and turn it over to Ed.
Great. So I want to make sure Adrienne is unmuted as well. So I guess my first question is just going to be, can you connect the dots between stormwater, sort of this idea of collaboration, and our drinking water? And sort of, when we're thinking about stormwater and we see the impacts like on a lake and the lake closure, I think it's pretty clear something happened here. There's a nutrient overload and nature is sending us a message. But I think what everyone worries about what comes out of their tap. And would there be any anticipated improvements to water quality and drinking water, particularly with stormwater? And
sure, I can start with that, and I'm sure Adrienne might be able to add something. So consider someplace like the Raritan Basin. You have a major water intake for multiple millions of people at the confluence of the Millstone and the Raritan watershed. Millstone and Raritan rivers. Yeah. If the Millstone River is impaired for nutrients and you're getting excess algae being produced, that causes a problem at the water treatment plant that receives the water from the intake at the confluence of the Millstone and Raritan. They've got to filter out all that algae. Mm-hmm. So that is a direct impact to the water supply.
Right.
But in addition to that, all the best management treatment devices that we would be talking about to help reduce nutrients being discharged to the watershed will also filter out other pollutants. Mm-hmm. Metals is a great example. We really don't want to be drinking high concentrations of metals in our drinking water. If we use some of these BMPs that we need to use to solve
the best management practice, right?
Yeah. If we use some of those treatment devices to manage our stormwater better, we're going to end up with less pollutants in the river, which flow to the water intake, which then becomes part of our water supply.
So the connection is very direct.
Very direct.
Adrienne, did you want to add?
No, I would agree with that. We know we've seen that green infrastructure solutions for managing stormwater, they can be a lot less costly than putting large pipes in the ground. And also, green infrastructure, better maintaining and managing that stormwater, that as Jim was just mentioned, it prevents us from having to over-treat the water that we're taking in for drinking water. So we can lower costs on both sides. And when we're doing that, again, we're coming up with better, more sustainable solutions and trying to keep costs low for communities and for property owners. Also, when we start looking at polluted streams and waterways, it can impact the use of that stream. Recreational opportunities can suffer as well. So water quality can have a myriad of impacts on how we live our lives and the cost to the community.
And I think it's important to note too, like in New Jersey specifically, a stormwater utility would have to grant credits if you manage your own stormwater well on your property. So if you have your own rain gardens or other sort of infrastructure to help absorb the water and clean it up before it runs off and it gets absorbed into the ground like a sponge with green infrastructure, you're going to be receiving a credit. So you're going to be paying less than your neighbor who's polluting more because they haven't implemented these kinds of things on their property. And that neighbor could be, any way that the local municipality arranges it. So this gets to the first question. I'm just going to take them in order here. Rooftop gardens, so if we call them green roofs or vertical gardens, do they help address stormwater? Are they part of the solution in stormwater management? Would that be something you would promote?
Absolutely, they're part of the solution. You have to make sure they're used appropriately because you got to make sure you've got the structure to support the weight of a green roof.
You can't just put a roof on a building and collapse it.
You start putting a lot of soil on a roof and you could have a problem.
Okay.
So you have to deal with the structural part and you have to deal with the waterproof part of it. Yeah. But it can definitely provide, one of the biggest positives to a green roof is not just the amount of pollutant that is removed, but the fact that a lot of the runoff that would normally come from the roof is totally intercepted and taken up by the plants you might be growing on that green roof. Mm-hmm. So you don't have any discharge in some small storms where you used to. Uh-huh. So it's not just about the pollutant uptake, it's about the volume reduction of runoff.
That'll slow down flooding and snarling traffic, as I mentioned earlier.
Right, exactly.
I think that's sufficient answer. Adrian, if you want to add in.
So I guess when we look at stormwater management devices and when we look at what types of solutions can be used and can receive a credit, we look at how well something manages the rate of stormwater leaving a property, the volume of stormwater leaving a property, or improving water quality. And green roofs do a pretty good job at touching upon each of those three. As Jim mentioned, it's really important how it's designed, how it's constructed, and then in maintenance. We see that green roofs can be one of the more costly BMPs, so we don't see them used as much as some of the other ones, but they can be a great tool that a property owner can use for stormwater management.
Maybe, Adrian, you could take this next one, which is who pays for the fees? So you've had some experience with successful implementation in Pennsylvania and other places. Is it just for businesses, people with large properties, people in townhouses? I guess it's a question from Stephen. They don't really control their exterior. They don't have a lot of control over what happens in the townhouse development. Although I would mention you can, run for your board and be on there as a representative and have a big say in what they're doing on a whole host of things, where they're getting their energy, what kind of green infrastructure they're using, plants they're using, et cetera. So I would encourage you to do that. But generally, folks are living there and they don't have direct control like a homeowner would. So who's paying these fees?
So generally, stormwater fees are implemented for all of the parcels in the community. So all property owners, even tax-exempt property owners, are typically charged with a fee. In New Jersey, I believe there's an exemption for agricultural properties, so there might be some ag properties that aren't paying, but typically all other property owners are. And so what we see is funding stormwater through a fee as opposed to doing it based upon taxes. It's a lot more equitable. Impervious area is the best correlation that we have between managing rate, volume, and quality of stormwater leaving a property as opposed to the assessed value of property. And then also, so making that switch, we see a cost savings to residential property owners because it's more equitable in the way it's being charged. And then with all property owners, including tax-exempt properties paying, we think about tax-exempt property owners, hospitals, universities, schools, churches. Oftentimes they have large building structures and large pavement, so they're generating a lot of stormwater runoff. Currently, they're not paying towards the cost that the community deals with in managing that. So what I've seen in over 40 communities where I've kind of done a test to see the cost to the average residential property owner paying to stormwater through a fee as opposed to paying for it through taxes, they on average save between 55 and 75% to pay for stormwater through a fee as opposed to increased taxes for stormwater management.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I gave a talk on stormwater utilities not too long ago, and I took a lot of flack when I said that everyone pays for the stormwater fee, and people were just appalled that I was going to assess a fee against a church or a school. And it's amazing the public backlash at anything that is suggesting you're going to hit them again. You're going to give them another tax. This isn't a tax, but it certainly, is referred to as a rain tax in the part of the community that really objects to this. But from my perspective, I don't care what you call it. I don't care if you call it a tax or a fee. To me, that's just semantics. If it's more efficient to pay for the things that we're going to need to pay for by having a stormwater utility, it makes sense. If it's not, then don't form a stormwater utility. A stormwater utility is not the perfect solution everywhere. But I think that's what people need to understand is this is not a requirement that in New Jersey, everyone's got to form a stormwater utility. It's a tool that can be used if people need a way to collect money for stormwater. Right now, any stormwater needs have to be funded through municipal taxes. So if you live in a community like Princeton, a lot of property in Princeton is owned by Princeton University. They're not paying for stormwater management right now. So if you're Princeton University, that's great. But if you're the rest of the community, you're effectively paying for stormwater management.
I've seen that stormwater fees can be a really good call to action for property owners, especially the tax-exempt property owners, in getting involved and partnering with the community and how to manage stormwater. When we do those comparisons of the impact of paying a fee versus taxes for property owners, some will pay a little bit more if it's a fee, some will pay a little bit more if it's a tax. But then when you apply a credit policy and you look at how property owners can partner with the municipality to manage stormwater management because they've chosen to partner with a community and become involved.
Excellent. And another question on here that came up, like who should create the utility? Is it best to go with something that's already existing as an infrastructure, whether it's a sewer authority or water authority, or do you recommend always starting a new stormwater utility authority? Kind of what has been in the experience?
The experience I've seen is that in almost all cases, if there's an existing wastewater authority, they'll expand that to take on stormwater. The infrastructure is fairly similar. The equipment that's used to manage the infrastructure is similar. Putting a stormwater fee on a wastewater bill can have a lot of efficiencies and can help with payment as well. So typically we're seeing expansion of a wastewater authority. Can also be a water authority when politics aren't good between a municipality and authority. An existing authority, that's generally when we see new authorities being formed. But in most cases, an expansion.
I totally agree with that. If you can avoid creating a new bureaucracy, it's going to be more efficient. So I'm always concerned if you start and there are places where starting a stormwater utility will definitely make sense. But generally, if you can avoid having to pay a new executive director and a new chief engineer, and if you already have that in place in a wastewater utility, for example, it's very easily parlayed into adding the stormwater.
Yeah, and that's, I think, well, mostly what we hear when we do these, but it is a question that comes up quite frequently. In addition, someone here asked about other finance models. So we're talking about a stormwater utility looking at impervious surface, concrete or pavement that doesn't absorb the water, right, and it runs off polluted into the nearest waterway. Are there hybrid models that also charge users? So I think particularly with the lake closures, assessing fees on boaters or folks that are there to water ski or jet ski or fish, and have those been able to generate enough money to deal with the challenges of stormwater?
There are lake associations in northern New Jersey that are trying to fund management of the lakes. Often that management is just, it's management to deal with the fact that the pollution has already hit the lake, rather than dealing with the pollution before it gets into the lake. So it's aerating the lake, so you don't have such bad algae problems, or you don't have such low DO and things like that. But it's
not going what they call like up the stream.
Right. But what typically happens is if you happen to have very wealthy homeowners bordering a lake, they might be able to afford, as part of a lake association, to deal with stormwater management. But if you don't have people that can put up serious money, it becomes much more difficult. Mm-hmm. And that's where forming a utility might make sense. But if you have a very active lake association, there's nothing from stopping a lake association from using some of the lessons learned with stormwater utilities and assessing a fee via the association to do some of the work.
Okay.
But in many places, you wouldn't be able to get enough money to do it.
So like a boating fee probably is not going to collect $16 billion that we need in the wastewater backlog. Adrienne, do you want to add anything on that?
I think when we look at the best way to fund stormwater solutions, looking at the cost-causative parameters, what cost is the community facing, and what are the things that are driving that cost? And looking at impervious area and how that impacts the amount of stormwater there is to manage. It's kind of a proven method for charging for stormwater, but that doesn't mean that it's the right solution for all communities. And when there's other things that are impacting the cost of managing stormwater, such as the boating and the recreation and those impacts, that can always be paired as another revenue source in order to try to spread the cost most equitably amongst everyone that's using that community.
One of the questions we get a lot is, well, they keep building. So we're the most densely populated state, and then they continue to build, whether it's townhouses or strip malls or, developments. Doesn't it seem counterproductive to continue to build and cause more stormwater issues? Then shouldn't we stop development? Wouldn't that solve this problem?
No, it won't, because most of the new development has stormwater BMPs as a requirement, and we're about to have new rules in New Jersey that's going to require green infrastructure for all new development.
And they're strict.
Very strict. I don't think most people realize how strict it's going to be. And so if we can't find a way to address existing development, we will never solve the problems that we have.
So it's more the legacy development from our fathers and their forefathers that have left us with this problem.
I really think it is. That doesn't mean there's not some new development somewhere that needs some help.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. But until we could focus on rules for new development till the cows come home, we will not solve the TMDL problems that I described without really focusing on the existing development.
And then one of the things I like to say is, if we don't focus on the things that have already been developed, which cost money, which there is very little of at the federal government, very little of at the state government, and the rest of it's small amount, maybe in your local municipal taxes. If we can't find a way to go after the people that are causing the problem, whether it's old or more recent, let's just say in my lifetime, we're not going to have enough money to tackle the problem. We're going to see more flooding, more pollution in our waterways, more of the effects that actually come at a high cost, right? Like Lake Hopatcong's closure, it decimated the whole area as far as businesses, people who had houses that were rentals, families didn't want to come in. I mean, these are real costs to people as well. So it costs nothing. I mean, I should say it costs a lot to do nothing. If not solving this problem actually comes at a cost as well. And so when you put it on scale and look at savings, and Adrian, that's really your expertise, is mapping this out over time, there are huge benefits that can actually save money in the long run by going with stormwater utilities in green infrastructure in particular to help address legacy development that's already out there. Is there anything else you want to add on that?
We've talked about flooding, we've talked about water quality issues. Another big concern that I see in most municipalities is the state of the stormwater infrastructure. In most municipalities, the infrastructure was installed by developers, turned over to the municipality. In a lot of cases, they don't even know where all of the infrastructure is and what the condition of it is. And based upon the time period when we saw a lot of it being installed, a lot is corrugated metal pipe. It's reaching the end of its useful life, and we're in what a lot of people would say is a deferred maintenance crisis. A lot more money needs to be invested just to maintain existing stormwater infrastructure than ever before, and we're seeing for every dollar of deferred maintenance, American Society of Civil Engineers is saying it's amounting to $4 to $5 of future capital improvement investment. So there's a number of funding needs for stormwater management, and having a new funding source that can equitably distribute those costs amongst property owners can be a real benefit to the long-term condition and sustainability of the community.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I want to thank you both for joining us. We're going to wrap up with a few things, what you can do going next. I want to thank a lot of folks for joining us. We started something called Flood Defense New Jersey to educate residents and local decision makers on these significant issues and the issues caused by stormwater to our communities and the local economy. So New Jersey LCV Education Fund, with our partners at New Jersey Future, Pinelands Preservation Alliance, as well as the Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissions and the New Jersey Highlands Coalition, have been working together on the Flood Defense New Jersey Coalition. We're all kinds of different partners working across, I think, with engineers and local towns to protect our communities from damaging floods and the harmful stormwater pollution, and really help communities to set up flood defense programs to build on the proven BMPs, or best management practices, that are on the ground projects that protects against flooding. They capture the polluted runoff, and they can repair failing infrastructure with this new funding to make communities cleaner, greener, and safer. So if you're interested in learning more and getting more involved, I know a lot of folks joining us today have been involved, to work with some of the organizations and get involved in Flood Defense New Jersey, I invite you to visit flooddefensenj.org, or to reach out to the contact at the end of this presentation to learn more. These webinars wouldn't be possible without incredible donors, so we'd also like to invite you to support the work that we're doing and to visit our website, which you can click on this logo here, or visit www.njlcvef.org to learn more. But we'd love you to become a member to help support this work in educating the community. I also want to take a moment to thank all of you for joining today for a great discussion. This PowerPoint is going to be posted on our website, so you can check it out there and share it with your friends. If you're interested in getting more involved, please reach out to Katie. She's just off camera here, Katie Baccarout. She's with the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters Education Fund, and she's working every day on these important issues to protect drinking water quality and our communities from flooding across New Jersey. So I want to thank you all. Have a great day, great night, and hopefully we'll see you back soon and have a chance to work together on these important issues going forward. Thanks again.